All right, so biological theory of hunger is going to relate very closely to drive reduction, internal processes within our bodies that try to maintain homeostasis. Okay, so our body telling us, hey, dum dum, it's time to eat, or hey, put down the spoon, or put down the fork, right? And so, one of the most common ways that we recognize that we're hungry is our stomach growls, our stomach contracts as it tries to digest something that's empty. Okay, so it's trying to digest nutrients that aren't there. Well, we know that it's not our stomach that tells us, hey, we need to eat or we need to drink or what have you. It's our brain that tells us because the stomach sends messages to the brain to let us know, hey, you're feeling hungry. You're cranky because you're hungry. Go eat a Snickers bar or something. Okay, and so in order to study this empirically, to gather data rather than just subjective definitions of how hungry you are on a level of 1 to 5, they did this experiment where they put a balloon down someone's throat, which you'd have to pay me so much money if I were to do that. Now, it's not inflated when they swallow it, y'all. It's deflated. Then once it gets down to the stomach, that's when they blow it up, right? And the purposes of this is so that it can press against the walls of the stomach. So whenever the stomach contracts, which is a sign that it's grumbling, that it's sending hunger pains, they wanted to see if the subject was also consciously aware of being hungry. Okay, so they wanted the subject to press this button each time they felt hungry. And what they found was that there was a correlation between stomach contractions and perceived feelings of hunger. Okay, so this is empirical evidence that our stomach plays some role, and some of y'all are probably like, yeah, duh, it plays a role, all right, that it plays some role in hunger. That's what this experiment shows us. However, it would be a misconception to think that the stomach is the only part of this process. Actually, what the stomach is doing is it's sending messages to our brain. Now, these messages are not very fast, okay? These are chemical messages through the endocrine system. They're sending hormones and neurotransmitters to the brain to say, hey, we are hungry. So what part of the brain do they send that to? The hypothalamus. Okay, the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that controls hunger. You have the lateral hypothalamus, which you'll often see abbreviated as LH. This is what tells us we're hungry. When hormones come and stimulate the lateral hypothalamus, it's saying, hey, it's time to eat. How do you turn that hunger off? You stimulate the ventromedial hypothalamus, sometimes abbreviated as VMH. Okay, so lateral tells us that we're hungry. Ventromedial tells us that we're full. There are neurotransmitters and hormones in our blood that send these messages to let us know consciously we are hungry. It is time to start eating. Does anyone need this slide? Okay. So our body chemistry can influence when we feel hungry. Y'all have heard of glucose. Glucose gives us energy. Y'all may have heard in biology of ATP, the conversion of energy. Okay, so this is where we get our energy to do things. It's through glucose. This is our blood sugar levels. If your glucose levels are low, that means you are hypoglycemic. When your blood sugar levels are low, you feel hungry. Okay, so if you've ever had to give fasting blood at the doctor's office because they're like, we want to measure what your resting metabolic rate is. We want to see if your blood sugar is too high. You may be a little cranky and you may be more tired, okay, because you haven't been able to eat. Okay, that's why when you're hungry, it's very difficult for you to focus or to pay attention to anything, okay, because you don't have the energy to do so. Your body can't convert that sugar into energy to complete tasks. When your glucose levels are high, you feel full, which makes sense. If you eat something and that puts energy into your bloodstream, then you no longer need to eat. Now, how does our body maintain homeostasis with glucose? Well, through the hormone insulin from your pancreas. Now, not everyone is born with the ability to create insulin, so store-bought is fine. In fact, diabetes used to be a death sentence. Okay, with type 1 diabetes, you'd be diagnosed with it when you were young and just waste away and eventually drop into a coma because you were not able to regulate sugar coming into your body until they figured out how to manufacture it in a lab. And now we've seen the life expectancies of people with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes extend immensely. Okay, so they inject themselves with insulin to make up for the lack of insulin produced by their own body, and that helps to maintain homeostasis, that balance, okay, that relieves the tension that we associate with our drives, like our drives for hunger, our drives for food or for water or for stimulation. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right. There are other neurotransmitters that are involved in influencing hunger, and you may be surprised that they're the same neurotransmitters that impact our mood. Now, if you are low on these neurotransmitters, you're going to feel hungry. If they're high, you're going to feel full. So this is my excuse for when I get hangry. Of course, I'm angry and cranky. I'm hungry. I do not have enough dopamine. You know, norepinephrine is adrenaline. Adrenaline gives us energy. You may remember that when our adrenal glands are stimulated and they release adrenaline into our bloodstream, that our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest system, shuts down. We don't need to focus on digesting food. We need to focus on escaping the threat that has just entered into our perimeter. Okay, so when you have a lot of energy from adrenaline, you don't need energy from glucose. So you feel full, you stop digesting. Okay, that's something to save for later. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical, which is why eating feels so good. Okay, with why it fills the void in my soul is because it sends dopamine to your nucleus accumbens. Okay, so too little of this means that you're going to be bored and you're going to be sad. Okay, so food equals happiness. You heard it here first. Serotonin, okay, helps with regulating depression. So one of the symptoms or the signs of depression is when someone starts eating too much or they start eating too little, they start sleeping too much, they start sleeping too little, and that's because their serotonin levels are off kilter. They cannot maintain that homeostasis. Now, how do you get serotonin without getting it prescribed? Well, it is present in tofu. It's present in eggs, cheese, which by this time that should mean that cheese has cured my depression because I eat so much of it, and salmon, as if I could afford that. Okay, this is an Animal Crossing. All right, so cheese, salmon, tofu, and eggs. This is where you can get. That's what I don't understand about the stonk market. Where they're just like, you had an entire generation play Animal Crossing, and you didn't expect us to learn something. Like that's where I like to live out my fantasies, like ever owning my own house or paying off debt. Okay, so tofu, eggs, cheese, salmon, that leads to increased rates of serotonin. So it makes sense that as a person goes through depression, their hunger levels may fluctuate. Okay, they may eat more or they may eat less depending on the levels of these neurotransmitters. Does it make sense so far? All right. So back to the hypothalamus. What does it tell you to do? Well, the lateral hypothalamus tells you that you're hungry. When it gets messages like hormones that stimulate it, it says it is time to eat. Now, if your lateral hypothalamus is lesioned, which is another word for damaged, then that means you will never feel hunger again. You may be starving, but you wouldn't know it unless you're like feeling your stomach and you're like, oh, there's an earthquake in there, right? Okay, so this could lead to extreme weight loss. So the way to remember this is LLL. Lateral hypothalamus, when lesioned, makes you lean. Lateral hypothalamus, when it's lesioned or damaged, it makes you lean, because the lateral hypothalamus, when it's working correctly, stimulates hunger. The ventromedial hypothalamus, by contrast, tells you when to stop eating. When the stomach sends messages saying, hey, you're full, okay, that's when your ventromedial hypothalamus tells you not to eat. If that's damaged, then you will never feel full again. No matter how much you eat or what you eat, you will never be satisfied, okay? Which sounds awful. What else is going to say? Oh, leptin is an anti-obesity hormone. Leptin with an L. Obesity, which is released by fat cells that become too bloated. So when your body notices, hey, we've got a lot of fat, we should probably stop eating, that's what stimulates your ventral medial hypothalamus to say, hey, they're good, we have enough energy, we don't need to keep doing this. Okay, so lateral, if it's lesioned, you'll become lean. Ventral medial, if it's lesioned, then that can increase your risk for obesity. Obesity. Does that make sense so far? Whereas ghrelin, another hormone, is a hormone that stimulates your lateral hypothalamus. The ghrelin hormone is a hunger hormone. The leptin hormone is a satiety hormone, telling you to stop eating. Does anybody need this slide? Hey, y'all are moving fast. All right, so again, leptin is produced by your fat cells when those levels rise, and so the body is telling you to stop eating, and it's telling you use up this energy, burn up this fat instead of glucose. So leptin stops hunger, so it goes to the ventral medial hypothalamus. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone, so it stimulates the lateral hypothalamus. Okay, so this satiety hormone is also known as an anorexigenic. Did I spell that right? Yeah. Anorexigenic. Okay, which may sound familiar if you've ever heard of the eating disorder of anorexia. People who are suffering from anorexia often very tightly control the amount of calories that they consume. Okay, it's often a symptom of OCD or a symptom of traumatic abuse, in which they try to exert some control over their environment. And the one thing they can control is how much they eat. Okay, so when you look at leptin, it is an anorexigenic, which tells you that it's trying to get you to stop eating. And we're going to talk about body dysmorphia and bulimia and anorexia later in this lecture. Okay, whereas the ghrelin hormone actually stimulates your hunger. Okay, and there's also another one known as orexin. Orexin is a hunger hormone that not only plays a role in hunger, but also plays a role in sexual behavior and in wakefulness. So in terms of your stomach. Okay, now ghrelin is released by the stomach, which then sends it to the lateral hypothalamus, telling you that it is time to eat. Are we good so far? All right. In addition to your individual biological influences on your hunger, you also have a heritage that influences your hunger or your weight. This is genetic influences on weight. Okay, so the number of fat cells that each person is born with isn't the same across the board. Okay, some people have more than others to a certain extent. Okay, so genetics can determine your risk of possibly having obesity later in life or diabetes later in life. Okay, and this affects your set point and your metabolism. Now, the fancy way to say metabolism is basal, okay, your base metabolic rate. Okay, this is your resting state. What is your metabolism when you're not doing anything? Now, at my age, my metabolism has severely dropped. So I'm not burning as many calories by just existing. Whereas when I was a child or a teenager, I could eat entire packets or entire packs of Oreos and not gain a single pound. And all my parents, my grandparents, older people, they would just be like, "Oh, you just wait, you just wait." And I'm like, whatever, boomer. And then I got to this age, and I'm like, snap. Okay, so when you're young, your metabolism is high. You can eat whatever you want and has no effect on your body, it seems like. When you're older, however, your metabolism starts slowing down. Okay, you're not able to expend as much energy and to burn as much fat. So now, if I'm even in the same room as food and I smell it, I gain weight. Okay, your set point is your body's ideal weight. Now, this doesn't mean society's ideal weight, okay, because that's a social construct. This is talking about your body's ideal weight. Think of it as a weight thermostat. Okay, just like with your temperature, you want to be somewhere around 98.6, unless you're using the thermometer at the front of the school where it's like you're 85 degrees and it's like, okay, I think that might be wrong. Okay, so your ideal temperature is in the 98s. If it drops too low, your body responds by making you shiver to get your temperature up. If you get too hot, your body responds by making you sweat to try to use evaporation to cool you down. Well, hunger works the same way. When your body falls below its set point, let's say you're normally 150 pounds, I wish, but you drop to 140, right? You lose 10 pounds for whatever reason. Okay, that is going to send messages to your body to say, hey, you're falling below weight. We need to get you back up to what you were at before. So your hunger increases and your metabolism slows down, which is why people have issues with dieting to lose weight. Because if you start limiting your portions and you start losing weight, your body is like, wait a minute, this isn't normal. Are we in the middle of a famine? What's happening? Why can't we get food? And so your body thinks, snap, I need to store up my energy. I need to save it as much as possible for when I need it, because I don't know when my next meal is coming. Okay, so your brain knows, no, I have food, I just have to wait because I'm on a diet. But your body goes into panic mode and it decides we're going to slow down our metabolism so we can reserve energy so we can get that weight back on. Okay, so completely counterintuitive. But think of it in an evolutionary perspective, that would make sense. Evolutionarily, if you start suddenly losing weight, your body is going to say, whoa, 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 this is much too fast. Something must be going on. We need to react to this situation. And so it tries to preserve that energy for you. Okay, now not everyone's metabolism is going to be the same. So even though younger people tend to have higher metabolisms, that's not necessarily going to be true for everybody. And you can also have other glands that get in the way of that metabolism, like thyroid issues. So if you have hypothyroidism, okay, that's going to lead to you gaining weight. If you have hyperthyroidism, that's going to lead to you losing weight. So it's not just your stomach, it's not just leptin, it's not just ghrelin, it's not just in your head. Okay, there are multiple biological factors that can result in you gaining or losing weight, either in a healthy or in an unhealthy fashion. Does anyone need this slide? All right, y'all are going to get done in record time then, because the last thing we're going to do today, and as soon as we're done with this, I'll let y'all go. Okay, as soon as we're done answering questions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you can have the rest of the class period to yourself. Okay, I'm going to do a free response question with y'all. Remember that for free response questions, you got to do TAD, term, apply, define. So pretend you're a business owner. You made a lot of money on the stock markets, and your profit depends on worker productivity. You have 5 workers, each of whom responds to a different method of motivation. So worker number 1 needs instinct perspective. Number 2 needs incentive-based theory. Number 3 needs drive reduction. Number 4 needs arousal theory. Number 5 needs Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Explain how you as a business owner would use those different methods to influence the productivity of your different employees. And don't worry about being ethical. You can write about unethical stuff if you want. Although last period really took that seriously. They're just like, okay, we're going to try to make every single one unethical. And I'm like, okay, guys, you little sociopaths. I love you, but I never want to work for you. And you can post your answers in the chat and we'll go over them together. The incentive theory states that motivation to complete a certain task increases when the incentive to do such tasks are increased. By offering your employee a raise when they increase their productivity, the employee's motivation will increase, leading them to completing the given task of working more productively. Good. We've done 1 out of 5. The incentive theory. That should be like number 2 of the 5, I believe. Instinctive motivation refers to the responses acquired through evolution to help an organism survive. By placing a shock collar on the first employee, you would be able to control their schedule by capitalizing on their instinctive fear of pain. All right, so I like that because that very easily could have moved over into behaviorism, that could have moved into the incentive theory of, oh, well, incentive could also refer to trying to avoid negatives, but you specifically described their instinctive, okay, aversion to pain. And so that's what made that definition and application applicable. Someone else for instinct theory? The instinct evolutionary perspective means that someone is motivated by biological internal motivations to do something. Well, that refers more to the, what's the word I'm looking for? That refers more to drive reduction. Okay, if you're talking about internal factors, like external would be incentive, internal would be drive reduction. Okay, and instincts are something that you don't have to learn how to do. Okay, so that's probably going to be the more difficult one for y'all to answer, is because what instincts do humans have except for their instinct to avoid pain, which is why I like that example of shock collar, long pen, for the avoidance of pain. Even though he specified how it was different from incentive theory. Okay, so incentive, a raise, that's pretty, obvious in this situation. Like if you give them more money, that could be a good motivator, although you could also run into the over justification effect, where instead of doing it for intrinsic reasons, they do it just for the money, and thus their motivation decreases. Okay, remember that drive reduction is internal, and that's talking about internal drives like hunger, thirst. Okay, so we're trying to break the tension when homeostasis gets out of whack, so we try to bring balance back to it. So we've done this one and we've done this one. We still got 3 to go. Maslow's hierarchy of needs states that there are certain environmental and emotional needs that must be met for people to achieve self-actualization. Good definition. Attempting to financially and emotionally aid your employees may allow them to approach self-actualization, potentially making them more motivated. So they don't have to worry about the bottom levels of the hierarchy. They got that covered because they're working for you. Okay, so you want to continue to have them working for you, and so they'll work harder in order to maintain Okay, that job. Good. Number 5. Someone in arousal theory said the arousal theory refers to people's drives to achieve an optimal level of arousal or interest. Good definition. Giving workers challenging but achievable tasks throughout the day will keep them interested but not overwhelm them to the point that they are no longer aroused. Excellent. You're specific by saying, hey, challenging but not overwhelming, because that could lead to them giving up and being discouraged. Okay. Someone said, would temperature count as a drive? That is an internal process that you're trying to maintain. Um, So it says, like, if I keep the store at 123 degrees, I'm pretty sure that's against the Geneva Convention, but okay. Every time they make a sale, I decrease the temperature by 1 degree. Okay, first of all, you're not going to get any customers in that store if it's 120 degrees, but okay, I'll take that as internal. Okay, your internal drive for homeostasis with your temperature. And so that motivates your behavior to sell more. Okay, or to maybe if it's too cold, you move around more. So instead of letting your employees just sit around and lounge around, if it's too cold, they're going to be motivated to keep moving and possibly keep selling or keep, building or whatever it is that they're doing. Okay, excellent. So we have addressed all 5 of our motivation theories. We're going to pick up where we left off with the motivations behind hunger, not just the biological motivations, which we covered in our last lecture, but also some external factors that play into when we eat and how much we eat. Okay, so we talked before about the biological factors like our hypothalamus, the lateral hypothalamus, and the ventral medial, the impact of hormones like ghrelin and leptin and dopamine and serotonin. But that deals with, like, oh, you feel a hunger contraction, so you must be hungry, so you eat. You're going through drive reduction and there's a tension, so you're trying to get back into homeostasis. Okay, so now we're going to move into the additional factors that affect when we eat. Okay, time has an effect on hunger. When it gets time for breakfast or time for lunch or dinner time, culturally, we have different understandings of when it's time to eat. Like my dinner time is around 5 p.m. So when it gets to around 4:30, I start thinking, hey, maybe I should start cooking, or maybe I should start looking for coupons for Domino's, whatever my fancy is. For other people, you may eat very late in the evening, like 7 o'clock. That would be late to me. Or you may skip breakfast. So in the morning, you may not feel hungry. Whereas if you have a habit of eating breakfast every morning, then you are going to feel hungry when you wake up. So we are told when it's time to eat based on when we're told to eat. So y'all, your lunchtime is after 12:05 until 12:35, in time for you to get back to your 6th period class. So 5th period, you might start feeling a little peckish, but 6th period, okay, you're probably full and you're like, okay, eating time is over. I have until 5 o'clock, or maybe snack time is after 7th period or during 7th period. Who knows? You could turn your camera off and you could eat a whole meal and no one would be the wiser, right? And I'd be jealous because I can't make you share it with me like I would in a normal class. Be like, did you bring enough for the whole class or for just me? An example of this is how time can affect hunger and how memory can affect hunger is that amnesia patients, okay, who have retrograde amnesia and cannot remember what's happened in their past, they can't form any more long-term memories. When they cannot remember their last meal, if you put food in front of them, then they will eat it as if they are hungry. Okay, so if they can't remember the last time they ate, they tell themselves, I must be hungry. It must be about that time to eat. And so that leads them to feeling hunger, not just stomach contractions. Now, some of this deals with reinforcement versus punishment. So remember, reinforcement is when you're rewarded. You can be positively reinforced by given something that you want, or you can be negatively reinforced by having something you dislike taken away. And so if you reinforce good habits and punish bad habits when it comes to eating, children will often learn to eat healthy. Okay, those behaviors will continue into adulthood when they are independent enough to choose how and what they want to eat. Now, what is the name for this type of conditioning that affects voluntary behavior? My tablet just stopped working. What is the type of conditioning that deals with voluntary behavior? Come on now.
Operant conditioning.
Operant conditioning, good. That's supposed to be an A. For some reason, my pen is acting weird. Okay, operant conditioning, that is where voluntary behavior is adapted. Involuntary behavior is classical conditioning. Now that can relate to taste aversion. Okay, when we learn that we like some food or don't like some food because we associate it with an illness, that's classical conditioning. Okay, where we're involuntarily taught to not eat a certain kind of food because of our past experiences with that food. But that's not the only way that we learn what to eat or what not to eat. We also have modeling. Who buys the food in your house? The parents. Okay, so you're not going out to the grocery store and filling up the cart with candy bars. Okay, your parents are the ones that decide what you eat for dinner or what you have available in the pantry to eat. Okay, so modeling, observational learning plays a role in the eating habits that we develop. So if our parents eat junk food or they don't cook or they don't teach us how to cook or they just order out, then we are going to follow in those same habits when we become adults. Versus if your parents teach you about portion size or how to cook for yourself, then you're going to develop those eating habits due to the impact of observational learning. Okay, another example with taste aversion. People who undergo chemotherapy as a treatment for cancer often feel nausea or a loss of appetite. If they don't associate it with the treatment, then they could associate it with the food that they're eating. So if they're getting chemo and they're eating their favorite meal, they may develop a taste aversion for that favorite meal. And if you don't like the taste, if you don't like the food, then you're not going to eat it. Does that make sense so far? Okay. In terms of positive and negative reinforcement, an example of this could be you finish eating your vegetables to stop something, to stop your mom from arguing with you about eating your vegetables. What type of reinforcement is that? You're doing the behavior in order to stop your mom complaining. Good. That is negative reinforcement. By eating your vegetables, the aversive stimulus of your mother's voice is removed. Okay, what about to make your grandma happy? You're doing the behavior in order to get a desired stimulus. That is positive reinforcement. But oftentimes we associate positive reinforcement with reward. For instance, if you're a part of the clean plate committee, then you get dessert. If you don't clean your plate, then that means you must be too full for ice cream. Okay, so this is going to reinforce those behaviors of eating things like Brussels sprouts, which as a kid I would think were gross, but now that I'm old, Brussels sprouts are fine. Lots of things change. Like you get excited about different things. Like I'm excited about a pillow. I'm like, oh yeah, my pillow shipping from Amazon. Like that's the highlight of my day. Or when you start testing out mattresses. When you're a kid, when y'all's age, y'all could sleep on a concrete slab and wake up fine the next day. I could fall asleep on a literal cloud straight from heaven and I'd still wake up with a crook in my neck. I'm like, I straight up had to go to the doctor once because I got out of bed and messed up my neck. Like I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't lifting anything. I just literally got myself out of bed and immediately the universe was like, bad choice, Jackie. And I had to have someone take me to the doctor because I couldn't move. I almost passed out from the pain. I was just like, oh no, I've broken my spine. This is why I shouldn't get out of bed ever. This is my new home. All right, are we good on reinforcement? All right. In addition to punishments and rewards for certain eating habits, we also have cultural influences. And this is going to vary by culture, whether it's Western culture or if it's Eastern culture. Now, there are some preferences that are universal. The preference for sweet food, okay, or sugar, that's something that all cultures have. Though American culture is very, very heavy on the sweet side of our foods because it releases dopamine that stimulates our nucleus accumbens. Remember that your nucleus accumbens is the pleasure center of your brain. So eat sugar, feel good. Okay, salty foods. That could be for drive reduction. If you don't get enough iodine in your diet, then your neck swells with a goiter. Okay, you want to maintain that balance between hydration and having enough salt in your diet because you require salt in order to live. Okay, so some of that's universal. It doesn't matter if you're in the East or the West or the North or the South, you're going to like sweet and salty foods. However, we do have some specific habits as we live in the West when it comes to certain foods. Like our diet is very heavy on meat. Okay, so to Western culture, steak is a good food. It's a highly valued food. Whereas if you're from an Eastern culture, say for instance, if you were a Hindu believer, this would be disgusting, okay, because it comes from a cow. So cultural and religious differences can determine what is food and what isn't food. Most of the world eats insects as a source of protein. It's Western culture that really sees this. Yeah, I can see your face, Nathan. You're like, what? This is a source of protein. This is a snack. You can find it in candies. You can have them chocolate roasted like almonds. You can have them crushed up and put in your food. You know, this is a delicacy in some places. All right. But for Western culture, we would look at that and say, I'm not eating a bug unless I'm on Fear Factor and there's money involved in it. Okay, one of the favorite things that they used to do in our AP trainings is they said, give your kids a chocolate covered cricket or a chocolate covered worm and see if they'll eat it. You know, ask them like, would you eat a bug? And then see if they'll actually do it. And so they did that at our training. They gave us chocolate covered insects and I ate one and it kind of tasted like peanut butter. So it's like a really uncomfortable Reese's cup. Imagine if you're handing that out for Halloween. You're like, no, it's okay, kids. It's just mealworms. It's chocolate. It's fine. No one would come to your door to be like the person who hands out toothbrushes or apples for Halloween, a pariah. What else about that? So we have Western concepts of what is good to eat and what's not good to eat versus other cultures like Eastern cultures where those norms may be different. For instance, in Korea, okay, spicy cabbage, kimchi, okay, that's a common staple in their diet. American version of that would be coleslaw. So whereas kimchi is more on the spicy side and served cold, coleslaw or Yankee kimchi is on the sweeter side. And we love our mayonnaise. I do love mayo. It's my culture. You once got a Bible on Halloween? Interesting. Was it like a big one or one of the little tiny ones? It's like New Testament.
It was like, so she opened the door and she had M&Ms in one hand and a little Bible in the other. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna be a good person, and I chose the Bible. And she put $1 in it, and I was like, nice.
So she is positively reinforcing Christianity for you.
Yes.
Here's a Bible, but also $1. I don't know. I feel like the M&Ms would taste better. You got a pickle in a bag, Roll Tide. That is such a Southern thing. Like, you've ever been to a gas station or a Piggly Wiggly, and like you just see a spicy pickle in a bag, and you're just like, God doesn't live here. Although I'm sure it tastes very good. I don't feel like I could ever make myself purchase a bag pickle. I feel like that I would be falling down a few levels in self-respect. It was the only option, and he was just handing them out. The other option was to say, no, I don't want your bag pickle. Did you eat it? No? Did you like throw it away or give it to a younger sibling? Give it to your brother. That's right. Just be like, I really want this pickle, but I love you, so I'm going to share it with you. Or if you've ever heard of pickled popsicles, that's a thing. Yeah, you freeze the pickle juice. Yeah, I know, Nathan. Yeah, we're very weird. Sprite is too spicy, but pickle juice, that's our thing. All right, so let's do a little bit of review. Question number 1, an answer in the chat. Don't hate on the pickle pop. Yeah, I read that as pickle poop, and I got really confused. And then I was like, what has God created? What motivational theory states that we are constantly aiming to be close to homeostasis throughout our day? Is it instinct, incentive, optimal arousal, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or drive reduction? Okay, those of you who have answered in the chat so far are correct. You give some people a little bit more time. Good, Christian. Okay, so going through each of these. Instinct theory. What is an instinct? How do you get an instinct?
You're born with
You're born with it. It is innate. You don't watch somebody else do it and then copy them. You're not rewarded or punished for the behavior in order to develop it. You are born with that instinct. Okay, that has nothing to do with your internal drives, like your internal drives to satisfy thirst or to satisfy hunger or sleep. Okay, these are internal. Incentive is external. Behaviorism. So that can't be the answer. Optimal arousal deals with your interest levels in something, whether it's challenging enough or too challenging, and whether or not you get bored. Maslow's hierarchy of needs does have basic needs at the bottom, but it's beyond just the needs for survival. It goes all the way to self-esteem and self-actualization and transcendence. So drive reduction is our answer here. We have an internal drive known as homeostasis. When we are in tension, like if we don't have enough water or enough food, that eggs on our drive, which energizes a behavior. It motivates us to eat or to sleep or to drink. And question number 2, an internal balanced state in which we do not feel we need anything to eat or drink, and we are not lacking in sleep, is known as what? Good, Nathan. Nathan, you doing that reminds me of like this meme of this guy that was on trial, and like they're reading, the things that he said. He's like, "You're thicker than a bowl of oatmeal," and he's like, so now when I see that, I just think, oh, thicker than a bowl of oatmeal, which is high praise. Oh, we're going to talk about changing beauty standards throughout the generations. And we're going to talk about how, like, back in my day, there are some certain beauty standards that they're like, Like today, I heard all of this about people making fun of millennials with their middle part and their skinny jeans. And I'm like, excuse you. Back in my day when I was in middle school, we would over pluck our eyebrows so they were super thin and way too far apart. And having a butt was a bad thing back then. And now it's through the exploitation of African American culture, like with the Kim Kardashian. Now we see that changing. Yes, the answer to this is homeostasis. That is in our internal balanced state that we want to maintain. When it's not maintained, we get a drive, an internal drive that tells us you need to eat or drink or sleep. Remember, an instinct is something you're born with, like knowing how to make a nest or knowing to fly south for the winter. Okay? An incentive is a reward. And optimal arousal deals with interest, okay, cognitive rather than biological. Okay, so the answer here would be B. 3. Which of the following is the ultimate goal of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I'll give you a hint. It starts with self. Good job, Nathan. Nathan's like, I'm going to beat all of you to the punch. Excellent. All of y'all are answering A. Now, that's not the only thing on the hierarchy of needs. That's just the highest level, the most difficult level to get to. Self-esteem is on there. Basic needs like food, water, shelter, and Wi-Fi is here on the bottom. But the ultimate goal is to get here. And then eventually, once you have become self-actualized, you can help other people become self-actualized through transcendence. That actually may need to be an A. Transcendence, helping others to level up, as it were, on this hierarchy. Question 4. Which of the following most accurately describes motivation in a broad sense, not a specific theory, just how would you define a motive or motivation? Sorry, Nathan, people beat you to it. You're wrong twice. All right, good. It looks like most of you put C. A complex behavior that is rigidly patterned through a species and is unlearned is instinct. A positive or negative environmental stimulus that motivates behavior is the incentive theory. And remember, it's not asking you for a specific theory that explains motivation. It's asking you what is motivation. A tendency to maintain a balanced or constant internal state is drive reduction. A need or a desire that leads to behavior, that is motivation. You are motivated to eat or drink or sleep. We good so far? All right, last review question. Which of the following is an example of a secondary motivator? Good, Nathan. And secondary means learned. It is not innate. Good. All of y'all are putting D. Money does not inherently have value. It only has the value that we give it, kind of like GameStop shares or AMC or Bitcoin. Okay. If you give a baby $1, they're probably just going to eat it or something. They're not going to know that it's valuable, right? These are primary motivators. And the thing about secondary motivators is that you use them to satisfy your primary motivators. So can you use money to get sex or food or water? Yes, you can. Okay, all of those are primary motivators. Are we good so far? All right, so we've talked about why we're hungry or why we eat. Now let's look at some of the eating disorders that are associated with these motivational theories. Now, a lot of these eating disorders are reflective of our culture, that our culture has created impossible beauty standards. Now, these beauty standards change over time, change over generations. Like if you look at Renaissance paintings, okay, the women there were not bone thin, okay, they were quite ample. I would do quite well in the Renaissance, okay? But today's standards are to be impossibly thin and to look like a Barbie doll, even though if someone did mirror the characteristics of a Barbie doll, it is likely, they've studied this, it is likely that they would break their own spine under the weight of their bosom. They would have to remove organs and ribs in order to get that waistline. And it would not be possible in a natural sense. You'd have to get surgeries in order to make that happen. Okay, so if these standards of beauty are impossible, then why do we adhere to them? Okay, because each culture is going to have different standards. Now, some of the ways in which people try to adhere to those standards puts them in mortal danger. So y'all have probably heard of anorexia and bulimia, but the full name for that is, oh, yep, Gavin, you're right. And we're actually going to look at a picture of human Barbie. I've got human Barbie, human Ken, and a Catman. When we talk about body dysmorphia. Anorexia nervosa is the full name. And this, of all the psychological disorders, of every psychological disorder in existence, whether it's depression or schizophrenia, okay, this is the most life-threatening. This has the highest mortality rate of all the disorders listed in the diagnostic model, because it is literally starving yourself. So this is an eating disorder in which someone of a normal weight starts dieting, and even though they become significantly underweight, they still believe that they are fat, and so they continue to starve themselves. Okay, so this is an aspect of control over their environment. If you lack control in other areas of your life, then you may fixate on the one area of your life you can control, what goes into your body and what comes out of your body. So anorexia nervosa is life-threatening. It is due to an extreme fear of weight gain and a distorted body image that's not based in reality, which leads to a resistance to eating. Some of the negative consequences that can come from anorexia include that it prevents ovulation. In fact, the majority of people who are affected by this eating disorder are going to be women, particularly teens, and they're going to be of a European or American background and of higher socioeconomic status. So young girls in America and Europe who are of a higher socioeconomic status are more likely to fall victim to anorexia. All right, so this can stop ovulation, because once your body falls below a healthy weight, it believes that it's starving, and it knows that you cannot survive childbirth. It knows that you are not getting the proper nutrients for yourself, and so by definition, you would not be able to provide the proper nutrition for growing a child. And so your body actually shuts down those hormones, and it shuts down your uterus. So menstruation will stop. That's one of the symptoms of anorexia. As a result of that imbalance in hormones, it can also lead to extreme hair growth over your entire body. So I'm not talking just like, oh, the hair on your head grows longer. I'm talking like you might start growing facial hair as a result of anorexia. Premature osteoporosis, since you're not getting enough calcium in your diet. Your body needs calcium, so it leaches it out of your bones, which is the only place that it has to get those nutrients. And this also leads to severe constipation from dehydration, okay, from the controlling of what calories go into your body. Okay, so a lot of this is tied to anxiety disorders, okay, because it's a way of trying to exert control over an area of your life when other areas of your life don't allow you that same level of control. You're like, I have this one thing, and it becomes addictive. Now with bulimia nervosa, you're not as likely to see someone become severely underweight from this. Okay, so it's a bit harder to spot. And in bulimia, it's not a matter of starving, rather it's going the opposite. It's cycles of binging and purging. Binging means excessive eating, but then once you're done excessively eating, you purge it through vomiting or laxatives. And this is typically going to affect people who are perfectionists, or someone who has suffered through childhood abuse. And again, it deals with control. It's one of those anxiety disorders, an extreme form, an extreme phobia of weight gain. The issue with this type of eating disorder, well, one of the many issues, is that vomiting and laxatives are not guaranteed to decrease the amount of nutrients that go into your body. So by the time the food has crossed through your stomach and gotten into your intestines, then you've already done that caloric intake. So flushing your system out with laxatives isn't going to decrease your weight like you would hope. And another thing is the way that laxatives work is that they're used to treat constipation. Now with constipation, it means that your waist has lost a lot of its water content, thus hardening it. So a laxative is trying to take water from your body and flush it into your intestines to help get things moving. So really through laxatives, it leads to extreme dehydration. So the weight loss that's seen from using laxatives inappropriately is more so correlated with water weight than it is with actual fat cells. Other consequences that come from bulimia include constant sore throats due to the purging. The enamel on your teeth gets worn away by your stomach acid, so dental issues are an issue. Kidney problems, extreme dehydration. Okay, all of those are consequences of this eating disorder. But anorexia it does have a higher mortality rate than bulimia, and bulimia is more difficult to spot. Okay, although one of the telltale signs is looking at the teeth and the esophagus due to the damage from stomach acid. Stomach acid is incredibly strong. The third eating disorder we're going to talk about is binge eating. So this is like bulimia, but instead of purging the food after excessive eating, you simply eat. Okay, so excessive eating is obviously going to lead to extreme weight gain. So there's no purging and they can't stop eating even after they're full. And that is going to lead to someone to become obese. Unfortunately, that binging is going to be associated with extreme feelings of shame, okay? Somewhat tied to cultural influences about how people are shamed for their body weight, and it's treated as it must be a you problem rather than a biological problem or an environmental issue. So there's a very high level of shame associated with binge eating as well. So with anorexia, someone becomes deadly thin. With bulimia, they're more able to keep a balanced weight, but they're more so focused on the aspect of control that comes along with binging and purging. And then with binge eating, it leads to obesity and high amounts of shame. Are we good so far? Now, all of that could fall under the category of body dysmorphic disorder. Okay, so this is a disorder when what you see in the mirror doesn't match reality. So this person is looking at herself in the mirror, and even though she is deathly thin and frail on the left-hand side, she still sees her as overweight. And so this is her reality. Even though everyone else can say, look, you are starving yourself and this is very unhealthy, she still isn't going to hear that or see that because this is what she sees in her mind. Okay, so your brain is telling you that there's something wrong with you physically. And so it becomes a fixation. It becomes something that you have to try and fix. Now, eating disorders can fall under that, but also plastic surgery addiction. And this isn't just a simple, oh, my septum is deviated, so I'm going to have a nose job to fix that and I'll be good. There is no end to it. It becomes a real addiction. So once you fix that one issue, then you start fixating on another perceived flaw. Okay, some examples of this include the human Barbie, who's undergone hundreds of thousands of dollars of plastic surgery, face augmentation, eye augmentation to make them appear larger, breast augmentation, the removal of ribs in order to make her waist fit that ideal. Here is the human Ken doll. Okay, this is what he looked like prior to all the surgeries. This is what he ended up with. So not just facial surgeries, but also even the changing of the color of your eyes through contacts. And then here we see someone who has an extreme form of body dysmorphia where they wanted to become, he looks kind of like a demon, but he wanted to become more like a cat. So that included fat implants into his cheeks to create those higher cheekbones, and whisker implants through piercings, because you can have things embedded into your skin as a piercing. If any of you've ever seen Lil Uzi Vert, he's got a $24 million pink diamond in his forehead. Okay. I don't think that it's going to become popular. I don't know. Maybe it's a new trend, but he's out there looking like, who's that guy from the Marvel universe? The guy with the Infinity Stone. Who am I thinking of?
Vision.
Vision. Yeah. He's out there looking like Vision. I don't know. Maybe he'll get popular. You know, face tattoos used to be a big no-no, and now lots of people are getting face tattoos. I don't think I'll ever try to become a cat, maybe in a next life, but I don't have the kind of money for plastic surgery. Are we good so far? All right, so now let's talk about the 3 different theories behind obesity. The first theory is that it is genetic, it's biological. The second theory is that it's environmental. And the third theory is that it's both. So we're going to look at both of those theories before we combine them into the third. So with obesity theory number 1, the biological idea, this focuses a lot on the set point. Now remember, your set point is like the thermostat in your body, but not for temperature, but instead for weight. So what is your normal average weight? And if you start going too high above that set point or too low below that set point, your body starts reacting to that change. So according to this theory, an obese person genetically, biologically, has a higher set point than somebody who weighs less. Okay, due to that higher set point, they need to eat more in order to feel satisfied, because their body is telling them, hey, you're falling below this weight. You need to get back to your thermostat. It's kind of like a dad whenever you touch the thermostat. Like, so help me God, don't change the temperature. Then if you do eat less, beyond just the biological, your environment starts telling you you need to eat. So you are more likely to fall victim to those external cues due to the internal cues. Your body is saying, we need this set point. Stop trying to lose weight. So it tries to convince you to eat, whether through stomach contractions or whether through lowering your ability to resist external cues. So how does this work in terms of the set point? Well, your set point is set by the number of fat cells you have in your body, and that number is determined by genetics, and the size of those cells. Now, you can increase both the size and the number of fat cells in your body. Okay, you can start out with like 10 and then move up to 11, move up to 20. Okay, but once the number of fat cells and their size starts increasing, that changes your thermostat. It raises your set point to be higher. It's really easy to raise the set point, very difficult to lower the set point. So the number of fat cells in your body increases, so does the size of those cells, and as a result, your body weight increases and your set point readjusts itself. Now, what about if you're trying to lose weight? Well, here's where the problem is. When you lose weight, the size of the fat cells in your body contract. They get smaller, but they don't disappear. You can't get rid of fat cells, not completely. You can decrease them in size, but they're still going to be there waiting. The only way to remove them is through surgical means, such as liposuction. Okay, so that's why it's so hard to keep off weight that you've lost, because the number of fat cells has stayed the same. They've just gotten skinnier. Once you start eating again, then that size of your cells is going to increase, and thus the weight of your entire body is going to increase. Okay, so to lower your set point, you need to remove those cells entirely, not just shrink them in size. Does that make sense so far? With the environmental approach, people who are obese have oversensitivity to external cues. Okay, maybe there's a higher availability of food. Maybe there's more commercials of that food. Maybe the time of day, based on social convention, tells them when they're supposed to eat. Okay, so if your parents buy a lot of junk food, then that's common, then it's available to you. So you're oversensitive to external cues, and you are insensitive to internal cues. So you may ignore the biological signs of hunger, like, oh, my stomach is growling, I'm hungry, and pay more attention to, oh, it's 12 o'clock, time to eat, whether I'm hungry or not. This is where the whole clean plate committee with raising children has raised some questions in terms of healthy eating habits, because if you tell your child you have to finish everything on your plate, then it doesn't get to a point of, oh, let me stop eating because I'm not hungry anymore. It's, oh, I have to keep eating because I'm forced to eat. And thus my set point is going to get higher and higher. So that when I am on my own as an adult, I'm going to need more food in order to satisfy me. So yes, it's good to make sure that your kids are eating healthy and that they're eating the food that you cook for them rather than junk food, but forcing them to eat, to say, oh, well, there's people starving in Africa, that sort of guilt trip, that could be a gateway to obesity. And, there's people starving everywhere. Okay. You not eating that food isn't going to end world hunger. Are we good so far? The second obesity theory is that it relates not so much on biological cues or predispositions, but more so relates to the environment. So obesity can be an effect of oversensitivity to external cues in your environment, like knowing that it's time to eat because it's around 12 o'clock, or eating because you're around other people. A lot of our social conventions revolve around food. You go to a wedding, there's food. You go to a funeral, there's food. You go to church, there's food. If you go to a movie theater, or if you go on a date, definitely food involved. Some of y'all are like, dates? What's that? So you could be scheduled to eat more just simply based on your environment around you. And also you could have an insensitivity to those internal cues. So you're not eating because you feel stomach contractions, but rather you're eating because you feel like it's the time of day to eat, or because the food is available to you. Like if you're bored and you don't know that you're bored, you might start going into the pantry looking for something to eat. Okay, so there is some cognitive and environmental aspects to hunger that we've already covered. Are we good so far? So some of those external cues that can result in you eating more include eating by the clock, or the sight of other people eating. Like if you've ever been in your 4th period class or your 5th period class, oh, everybody's got their cat today, yay. And you see somebody take chips out of their lunch, then you're going to want to start eating. It's sending you external cues telling you, hey, maybe you should start doing what they're doing. And then a lot of our social settings revolve around food. Okay, a lot of our social conventions revolve around food. Are we good on obesity theory number 2? All right, the number 3 is simply a combination of theory 1 and theory 2. It's not just genetics or just environment, it's a combination of those two things. Now, particularly in the United States, we have seen a rapid rise in obesity. Back when they started studying this in 1980, 1 in 10 people were morbidly obese. By the time I was born, 3 out of 10 people were morbidly obese, and that's probably only increased since then. So what are some of the effects of that, or what has led to that high rate of obesity in the United States? Well, Western cultural differences could contribute. Even though sugar is a universal, like every culture likes sweet things, that's a human thing, not just a cultural thing. Even though that is a universal trait for what we eat, we kind of go overboard with it. And a lot of American foods have sugar added to them, like sodas. So even calories that you don't eat, but calories that you drink. Okay, soda has a lot of sugar. Even our fruit juices have sugar added to them. Children from a very young age get hooked on sugar, and they have a preference for that. So it's not just a matter of eating candy bars for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything around us has some form of sugar added to it. Even just regular fruit has sugar in it. So if you're trying to do a diet, then it's better to stick with vegetables than it is with fruit, because you may not be accounting for the sugar content in them. Also, we as a nation focus a lot on pre-processed foods and food that is made for us rather than us making the food. We have fast food chains on literally every corner. You can't go by and exit on the interstate without passing by a McDonald's somewhere. Okay, so we have that availability of that food that is less healthy or higher in trans fat or in sugar. And pre-processed food tends to be cheaper. Now, why would we get processed food? Because it lasts longer. Okay, if you've ever bought vegetables and fruits for yourself, you may have been disappointed that like a week later, you go to eat a pear or you go to eat something that you bought and it's already past its expiration date. Okay, it's not ripe anymore. Okay, so fruits, vegetables, non-GMO foods, all of those are very expensive, and that's very hard to access if you don't have a higher food budget, especially if you live in a food desert where your only source for food may be a Dollar Tree or a Walmart. All right. And so you don't have access to like a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's where they typically have healthier selections. Okay. So socioeconomic status can affect the rates of obesity. And so people with lower socioeconomic status tend to have higher rates of obesity, not just because the food that is unhealthy is cheaper, but also in America, our healthcare system can bar some people from getting some of the healthcare that they need. In addition to that, in terms of healthcare, you also have limited mental health care resources available. Okay, some people don't eat to live, some people live to eat. Okay, filling that emotional void or using it as a coping skill, okay, in order to deal with boredom or tragedy. And so a lot of the fat shaming in American culture looks at obesity as a choice, okay, and they look at it as a failing of that person, which we know, however, that's very, very difficult to lose weight, okay, and that shouldn't be a part of our national conversation. I remember Lizzo, when she first came on the scene, people were fat shaming her left and right, saying that she was quote unquote unhealthy. If you've ever seen one of her concerts, okay, she's up there dancing, she's singing, she's playing a flute. Okay, do you know how strong your lungs have to be able to play a flute? Like if I tried to do a quarter of everything that she did on stage, I would pass out dead. Okay, so the focus on weight shouldn't be that skinny equals healthy. Okay, like we saw with anorexia nervosa, the deadliest psychological disorder of all the psychological disorders. Skinny doesn't automatically equal healthy. Okay, so everyone's going to have a different set point. Everyone's going to have a different weight for their health. Okay, so fat shaming people is not a way to raise awareness about that. It'd be better to provide healthcare opportunities or to provide food resources that eliminate these food deserts, especially for people lower in the socioeconomic scale. Are we good so far? Okay, so if someone is looking to lose weight, there is no easy, fast way to weight loss that is also healthy. Okay, there can be some unhealthy methods. Starving yourself is not healthy. Okay, and then as soon as you start eating again, your body's going to say, hey, we're out of a famine. Let's start bulking up. Let's start saving our fat reserves for energy. In order to maintain weight loss, you have to make permanent changes to your lifestyle. And those permanent changes are going to include exercise and healthy eating habits. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done. Okay. I may have joined a gym, But if I can't carve out time to actually go to the gym because I'm taking care of kids or I'm taking care of family members or I'm working all day or I'm exhausted after working all day, it's very hard to stick to that goal of working out every day. All right. But 30 minutes of exercise a day is the standard. So you should set reasonable goals. Don't say, I'm going to go to the gym for 4 hours a day. That's not reasonable. You will wear yourself out. You're probably going to pull something. If you're me, you're probably going to pull something the very first time you try to lift anything. Okay, I've once gotten out of bed and hurt my neck so badly I had to go to the doctor. I didn't do anything. I didn't lift anything. I just got out of bed, and that was my first mistake. God was looking down at me and he was like, not today. Should have stayed in bed. I knew better. Okay. Make sure that you're setting reasonable goals for yourself. You shouldn't set a goal of, I'm going to lose 30 pounds by the end of the month. Y'all, that's a pound a day. And that's not reasonable. Maybe half a pound a week or a pound a week would be more reasonable. So don't set yourself up for failure by going to extremes. And a lot of the weight that you lose in the beginning, you may start losing weight really quickly. You're like, I lost 5 pounds this week. But then the week after that, I only lose 1. And the week after that, I only lose 1/4 pound. Well, most of that weight that you first end up losing is water weight. Okay, so that's not shrinking the size of your fat cells. It's merely draining the water out of your body. Okay, so you got to make sure that you maintain hydration in weight loss, and don't get discouraged if your weight loss starts slowing down. Okay, because this is a permanent change. This isn't I'm going to lose 30 pounds in 1 month and then my life will be perfect. That's not how it works. Also, you've probably seen a lot of fad diets, okay, dieting pills, ways to count your calories, meal plans that can be sent to you, detox drinks. Like I've seen those, like try Sarah's Discovery on Instagram. I don't know why they're targeting me, but they're just like, you need to try this to lose weight. And I'm like, mind your own business, Jeff Bezos or whoever, NSA agent. Okay, so those fad diets, they may lead to rapid weight loss in a short period of time, okay, but they're not going to be long lasting. Okay, so there's no easy route or fast route to weight loss. It is habits that you have to maintain for the rest of your life. And don't feel guilty if you break your diet or you miss a day of exercise. Even in exercising, you need to have a rest day. You can't do arms day every day because then your legs will be super skinny. Okay. You can have a cheat day on your diet. Okay. Don't think that, oh, I have to give up brownies forever. That's not a life worth living. Okay. You can make healthier life decisions without completely giving up all of the fun things in life, because eating fun feels good. Okay. It sends some dopamine rushing to us. So this doesn't mean give up all sugar forever. Okay, maintain reasonable goals. Like instead of drinking regular soda, switch to diet soda. A lot of our calories come from what we drink. Or before you eat, drink a glass of water because that'll fill your stomach up and make you feel fuller. When you're eating, eat for 10 minutes and then pause for 5. Then if you're still hungry after that 5-minute pause, you can go back to eating. Okay, the reason for this is that your stomach sends hormones to your hypothalamus, like ghrelin and leptin. But hormones travel a lot slower than neurochemical messengers like neurons and synapses. Okay, so you got to give it a minute. You got to give your stomach time to release the hormones and for them to be carried to your brain, so your brain gets the message, I'm full, stop eating. Okay, so slow yourself down while you're eating rather than rushing through it. Although I know that's hard to say with the lunch schedule that we have. Like if we had an hour and a half for lunch, then yeah, you could do this whole 10, 5, 10, whatever, and take a nap. Okay, but like in a regular year especially, we'd get what, 20 minutes lunch? Yeah, so it's not possible to do that during a normal year. Okay, or even in scheduling exercising. I don't know about y'all, but when I get done for the day teaching, I am tired. My eyes hurt, my head hurts, my neck hurts. I'm just over it. And so I don't really feel like going to the gym, or I don't really feel like going outside for a walk, because that's where I might run into people. I don't want that. I just want to sit on the couch and not even do anything, not watch TV or look at my phone. I just want to sit there and just try not to think because I've done my thinking quota for the day. Okay. Another trick that helps is the size of your plate. If you get a smaller plate, then to your brain, that tricks you into thinking that you've eaten more food. So you start feeling fuller faster. If you have a giant plate, then one, you're going to be inclined to fill it up with stuff. And two, your brain thinks, oh, I haven't really eaten that much food because I've only had one plate of it. Okay, so just some little tips and tricks for healthier eating habits. Are we good so far? Okay, so how does insulin play into this? Well, when we have low blood sugar, if you've ever had low blood sugar and you feel faint or you get a headache or you just don't feel like doing anything, that's because your glucose levels in your blood have dropped. That signals to your body, hey, we don't have sugar to turn into energy. You need to eat. However, if you constantly keep your glucose levels high, okay, if your blood sugar rate is very, very high, you may feel full, but your body isn't going to be able to keep up with all of the sugar in your bloodstream. It's going to keep pumping out insulin, and those insulin levels are going to remain high. And eventually, they're not going to be as effective. So, y'all have probably heard of type 1 diabetes, which is the diabetes that you're born with. But there's also type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes, where if you have eating habits like this, where your insulin levels are very, very high, then you could end up developing diabetes and have to get supplements of insulin. And this can lead to issues like blindness or the losing of limbs, like you may lose a foot if it's uncontrolled diabetes, okay, high rates of obesity. But the thing with type 2 diabetes is that it is preventable through diet and exercise. Okay, but there's also a genetic component to it. Like in my family on my mother's side, once the women get to around age 40, and I'm getting there, that's typically when we see the onset of type 2 diabetes. And so we got to start seeing the doctor to try to manage that and keep our weight down so that we can prevent that from developing for as long as possible. Once you get type 2 diabetes, you're going to have to start taking insulin in order to manage it. And they're also going to try to help you control your weight gain and your eating habits to lengthen your longevity. Are we good on this? So why are we as Westerners or people in a Western society so focused on weight? Okay, because our beauty standards over the centuries have become progressively more and more thin. Okay, so the ideal prior to the 20th century was like what you see in Renaissance paintings. Okay, this would not fly today. Okay, so you go from beauty models like Marilyn Monroe, who I believe was like a size 13. Then you get to levels like Kate Moss, where you're a size 0. This does not mean healthy. It doesn't even necessarily mean beautiful. Okay, because those are cultural standards. They're created by our society. Okay, they don't always represent individual beauty. Now, women are not the only ones who have to struggle with unrealistic beauty standards set by society. Men also deal with issues like anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. But men are often told the opposite message of, in order to meet the male beauty standard, you have to be super jacked, okay? Or you have to look like Captain America, right? Which is also an unrealistic expectation, okay? The people who star in Marvel movies, they have their personal trainers. Okay, they have their personal gyms. They can buy whatever food and supplements that they want. They can work out all day because that's a part of their job. They can hit the gym every single day for at least an hour of the day to get swole. Okay, normal people like us cannot. So it's not helping us to hold ourselves to those unrealistic standards. And in fact, we often have misconceptions in heteronormative relationships of what the opposite gender finds attractive. Now, do we care what men think about our bodies? No. Okay, so this is just an example. But when it comes to body dysmorphia, body dysmorphic disorder, We don't see ourselves as we are. Instead, we see ourselves as perceived ideals and how we're not reaching those ideals. Okay, so the female ideal in heteronormative cisgender ideals is that they're going to be on the thinner side because they believe that men desire women on the thinner side. Okay, but in these surveys, they found that the idea of what women think men want and what men actually claim to prefer are very different. So as you can see here, what men actually preferred is further to the right on this scale compared to what women think men preferred. Okay, and then women's current body image is the furthest to the right. So the furthest from what they perceive as the male ideal under the male gaze and their own ideal under that. Okay, so we do have a lot of work to do as a society to make sure that young people, especially women, young women in the teen age group, know that just because we have these dysmorphic ideals of what we think is desirable, that doesn't always make it true. Remember, skinny doesn't equal healthy. Okay, you can be too skinny, like with anorexia nervosa, and it can end up actually making your body shut down and die. Okay, so it's important to focus on what your doctor says is your appropriate BMI, what your doctor says is your appropriate weight gauge, and to remember that if you don't always stick to that healthy eating or that healthy lifestyle, that doesn't mean you feel guilty. It just means that the next day is a new day and you can start over again. You are more than just your physical self. You're more than just your physical body. And just like you shouldn't ascribe your self-worth to your grades, you also shouldn't ascribe your self-worth to what you look like. Does that make sense so far? Because even the most beautiful people, the people that we think are just drop dead gorgeous, they too are going to have things about themselves or have self-esteem issues or perceived flaws that they want to improve. Okay, but that can also lead to body dysmorphia with plastic surgery. Okay, so don't go to these extremes. Be happy with what you got. You're healthy, you're breathing, you're alive, you can function, you're ahead of the game.